I picked your daughter up drunk from a stranger's house party, and I didn't tell you." For 1 second, the words didn't fit inside my kitchen. They hovered there like smoke, refusing to settle. My mouth went dry. The dishwasher hummed like nothing had changed, like betrayal was just another appliance sound. My husband stood by the sink with his sleeves rolled up, hands still wet, staring at the window over the counter as if the backyard could save him. The overhead light threw a hard white shine across the granite. It made every crumb, every water spot, every tiny mess look guilty. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt something inside me clamp down, quiet and sharp. "Say it again," I managed, and my voice sounded smaller than I wanted. He swallowed. His jaw tightened the way it does when he thinks he can fix something with a careful tone. "I picked her up," he said. "Last weekend, she called me. She was scared. I got her home." My fingers slid along the edge of the counter until they found the back of a chair. I held it like it might keep me upright. The chair was warm from the vent beneath the table. That warmth felt wrong. "How do you know?" I asked, already knowing. His eyes flicked to the hallway, toward my daughter's room, then back to me. That small movement told me everything. This wasn't a confession. This was a corner he'd been pushed into. I heard it again in my head. Drunk from a stranger's house party. A sentence that came with images I couldn't stop from forming. Dark streets, loud music, unfamiliar hands, my daughter's body too heavy to hold herself up. I pressed my palms flat to the countertop. "Did she come home like that?" I asked. "She was intoxicated." He spoke like he was reading from a safety pamphlet. "She couldn't walk straight." I stared at him, waiting for my own brain to catch up with my ears. My daughter was 17. My daughter, who still left hair ties on the bathroom sink and forgot to plug in her phone, had been somewhere I didn't know, unable to stand. "And you just brought her home," I said, "and never told me." His face hardened, not with anger, something worse. That practiced certainty he uses when he believes he's doing the noble thing. "I made her a promise," he said. "I tell both girls, if they ever need a ride, they call me. No questions. No judgment." I let out a slow breath that sounded like a laugh, but didn't feel like one. "No questions," I repeated. "No judgment." My eyes burned, but I refused to blink. "So I'm what, exactly? The question? The judgment?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I didn't want to break her trust. A tiny, bitter thought slid through me, and you broke mine instead. I turned my head toward the hallway, listening. The house felt too still, like everyone was holding their breath. I could hear the refrigerator clicking on, the faint rattle of ice in the tray. Ordinary sounds, the kind of sounds you notice only when something is very wrong. "I need to hear it from her," I said. He stepped forward. "Please don't what?" I cut in, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. "Don't parent my child? Don't ask what happened in my own home? Don't know?" He flinched. It was subtle, just a tightening around the eyes. But I saw it. He was used to being praised for being the safe adult, the hero with the car keys. He wasn't used to being questioned. I walked past him, down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the wood floor. Halfway there, I stopped and forced myself to inhale. My lungs felt tight, like I'd been running. I was not going to walk into my daughter's room like a storm. I was not going to become the thing she was afraid of. I knocked once. "Yeah?" Her voice came through the door, a little too quick. I opened it slowly. Her room smelled faintly of vanilla lotion and the clean detergent I use for her sheets. A string of tiny lights hung above her desk, casting soft gold onto her notebooks. That soft light made her look younger. She sat on her bed in an oversized sweatshirt, knees pulled up, eyes fixed on her phone like it was a shield. When she looked up and saw my face, her shoulders dropped just a fraction. Not relief, not calm, resignation. My stomach twisted. "Did you go out last weekend?" I asked. She didn't answer at first. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Then she nodded once. Did you drink? My voice stayed even and it took effort. Be honest. Her chin trembled. She nodded again. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. I forced them to loosen. How much? Her eyes flicked past me, toward the doorway, toward him, standing behind me like a shadow. Too much, she whispered. I turned my head slightly and saw my husband's face in the hall. His expression wasn't guilt. It was a plea, like I was about to ruin something precious he'd built with her. My daughter's voice broke. I didn't want you to know, she said. I didn't want you to hate me. I took one step closer to her bed. The carpet muffled it, like the house was trying to soften the moment. Sweetheart, I said, and my throat tightened on the word. I don't hate you. Her eyes filled fast and she wiped them with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I was scared, she whispered. I couldn't even walk. I thought I was going to pass out there. That sentence hit me like cold water. My mind flashed to her lying on some couch in a stranger's living room, music pounding, people laughing, nobody caring. A quiet terror rose in my chest, thick and heavy. And you called him, I said, my voice suddenly thin. She nodded. He came right away. I looked back at my husband. He didn't step into the room. He stayed in the doorway, letting my daughter's fear do the talking for him, letting it be the reason I couldn't get angry without feeling cruel. I turned back to her. Did anything happen to you? I asked. She shook her head hard. No, I made a stupid decision. I didn't know everyone there. Her voice collapsed. I didn't want to die, Mom. There it was, the part no one prepares you for. The part that doesn't care about rules or punishment or who kept what secret. My vision blurred for a second. I blinked it away. I sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to crowd her. The mattress dipped. She stiffened, then slowly leaned into the space between us as if she still wasn't sure she deserved comfort. In the doorway, my husband's breath sounded loud. He shifted his weight and the floorboard creaked beneath him. That small sound made my daughter flinch. I looked at him, and something in me cooled. Not peace, not acceptance, clarity. You made a deal with my child, I said quietly, and you made me the outsider in my own family. He started to speak, but no words came out. And in that silence, I realized this wasn't just about one night and one ride home. It was about who gets to decide what truth I'm allowed to live with. The next morning, the house felt different, like the air had been rearranged while I slept. The light coming through the kitchen window was pale and unforgiving, showing everything too clearly. I stood at the sink, rinsing a mug that didn't need rinsing, listening to the quiet. My husband moved around behind me, careful with his steps, as if noise itself might provoke something. He opened drawers slowly, closed cabinets without letting them click. The refrigerator door eased shut with a soft push of his palm. Every sound was controlled, every movement measured. It made my skin prickle. I set the mug in the drying rack and didn't turn around. Is this how it's going to be now? I asked. He paused. I felt it more than I heard it. How it's going to be? This, I said, gesturing vaguely with one hand, tiptoeing, waiting for me to explode. He sighed. The long, patient kind, the one that suggests he's already forgiven me for a reaction I haven't had yet. I just don't want to make things worse. That sentence landed wrong. Worse for who? I dried my hands on the towel and finally faced him. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, like he was preparing for a calm discussion between equals. His face was composed, almost gentle. That composure felt like a shield. You decided something important without me, I said. You decided I didn't need to know my daughter was in danger. She wasn't in danger anymore, he replied quickly. I handled it. There it was, handled it, as if my child were a leaking pipe or a scheduling conflict. My jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that alone. I wasn't alone, he said. She trusted me. The words stung in a precise place. I folded my arms, mirroring his posture without meaning to. And I'm what? The person she can't trust? His eyes flickered just for a second. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The room filled with silence, thick and awkward. The clock above the stove ticked loudly, each second too distinct. He looked away first, his gaze drifting to the window like the answer might be written in the condensation on the glass. I did what I thought was best, he said finally. For her, I said. For both of you, he corrected. That correction made something cold settle in my chest. It sounded rehearsed, polished, like a line he'd already decided would justify everything. I picked up my purse from the chair and slung it over my shoulder. I'm going to work, I said. We'll talk later. He nodded too quickly. Okay, that's good. Space is good. As I walked past him, he reached out, his fingers brushing my elbow. The touch was light, almost affectionate. I pulled away without thinking. The look on his face, surprise, then something like hurt, flashed and vanished. Outside, the morning air was sharp. I inhaled deeply, trying to clear my head, but my thoughts raced anyway. Images from the night before kept intruding. My daughter's trembling voice, his calm explanations, the way he'd positioned himself as her protector while quietly pushing me out. At work, I couldn't focus. Emails blurred together. Conversations passed without sticking. I caught myself staring at my phone, half expecting a message from my daughter or some sudden confession that would make this simpler. Nothing came. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A text from my sister. How's everything? You sounded off yesterday. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. I typed, erased, typed again. Finally, I wrote, We had a thing with the kids. I'm fine. The lie tasted bitter. When I got home that afternoon, my daughter wasn't there. Her door was open, bed neatly made. A note on the counter in her handwriting said she was at the library with a friend. Relief washed through me, followed immediately by guilt for feeling it. My husband sat at the dining table with his laptop open, pretending to work. He looked up when I came in, offering a small, hopeful smile. She okay? He asked. So you're asking now? I replied. He closed the laptop slowly. I always ask. I set my keys down harder than necessary. You ask after the fact. He stood, pushing the chair back. The scrape of wood against tile was loud in the quiet room. I'm not your enemy, he said, his voice low. I met his gaze. Then stop acting like I am. Another silence fell, heavier than the ones before. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I knew well, his tell when he felt misunderstood. You're making this about you, he said. This was about her safety. The accusation landed cleanly. My breath caught for just a moment. Her safety includes her mother knowing where she was, I said. She asked me not to tell you, he replied. That was the second time he'd said it, and this time it felt deliberate. A line drawn. Her request over my right. I'm her mother, I said quietly. And I'm her stepfather, he shot back. I love her too. Love. The word echoed, hollow. I nodded once, slowly. Then love me enough to be honest. He looked away again, jaw clenched. I didn't think you'd react like this. Like what? I asked. Like I betrayed you. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I steadied myself against the back of a chair. Because you did. He shook his head, a small, frustrated motion. I protected her. And you excluded me, I said. Those two things don't cancel each other out. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then picked it up, turning slightly away from me as he read the message. That small movement, a half turn of his body, felt like another door closing. Who's that? I asked. Just work, he said too quickly, slipping the phone into his pocket. I watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his foot tapped once against the floor. A flicker of something, unease maybe, passed through him. Are there other things you've decided not to tell me? I asked. He froze, just for a beat. Then he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're overthinking. That smile was worse than anger. It made my stomach sink. I felt suddenly tired, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't agreed to. "I'm going to make dinner," I said, turning toward the kitchen. Behind me, he exhaled, the sound sharp. "You're blowing this out of proportion." The words followed me like a slap. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for a pot, the metal cool against my skin. I focused on the clatter, the routine, anything to keep from saying something I couldn't take back. But as I stood there, stirring absent-mindedly, one thought kept circling, insistent and unwelcome. If he could keep this from me so easily, what else had he already decided I didn't need to know? Long before any of this happened, before late-night phone calls and careful lies, my life was built on knowing too much too early and learning to carry it quietly. I grew up in a narrow house with thin walls and a furnace that rattled like it was always on the verge of giving up. Winters smelled like dust and old metal. Summers were thick with heat that pressed into your skin. My mother used to say, "Pay attention, that's how you survive." It wasn't advice, it was instruction. I learned early to notice what people didn't say. The pause before an answer, the way a voice dropped when money came up, the silence after a slammed door. Silence was never empty in our house. It was full of meaning. When I was 19, I married my first husband because I was already tired. Tired of choosing, tired of deciding, tired of carrying things alone. He was steady, predictable. He worked construction, came home smelling of sawdust and sweat, kissed my cheek, and ate whatever I put in front of him. There was safety in that, or at least the appearance of it. Our daughter was born 3 years later. I remember the weight of her on my chest, the way her tiny fingers curled instinctively, like she already knew how to hold on. In the hospital room, the light was soft and yellow, forgiving. I thought then that love would be enough to keep us all honest. I was wrong. The marriage didn't explode, it thinned. Conversations became logistical. Touch became habitual. One night, after he'd fallen asleep on the couch, I found a folded envelope in his jacket pocket. Inside were numbers written in his handwriting, amounts, dates, names I didn't recognize. I never asked him about it. I folded it back and put it where I'd found it. That was my first lesson in how people justify silence as protection. When he left 2 years later, he said it calmly, almost kindly. "I'm not built for this," he told me, as if family were a structure flaw. He moved out within a week. Child support came late, then stopped altogether. I took on a second job. Nights smelled like burnt coffee and copier toner. Mornings were rushed and loud. I learned how to stretch groceries, how to say maybe next time, how to smile when my daughter asked why other kids had things we didn't. There was a red spiral notebook I carried everywhere back then. It lived in my purse, its edges soft from use. I wrote everything in it. Hours worked, bills paid, bills overdue, school reminders, grocery lists. It was how I kept the chaos contained. If it was written down, it couldn't sneak up on me. Years later, when my daughter was 12, I met the man who would become my second husband. He volunteered at a school fundraiser, tall and calm, laughing easily. He listened when I spoke. That alone felt like a gift. He didn't rush me. He didn't pressure me. He showed up consistently, which, after years of inconsistency, felt like love. When he met my daughter, he knelt to her level, asked about her interests, remembered her favorite snack. I noticed everything. I always did. He had a daughter, too, a few years older than mine, from his first marriage. She visited every other weekend at first, then more often. Eventually, she moved in full-time. Our house filled with teenage noise, backpacks by the door, shoes kicked off wherever they landed. We blended slowly, carefully. I thought that meant we were doing it right. I stopped carrying the red notebook everywhere, not because I didn't need it anymore, but because I didn't want to look like I still did. Financially, things stabilized. Emotionally, I let myself lean, just a little. I let him take over some things. Rides, check-ins, discipline. I told myself it was healthy. I told myself I didn't need to be in charge of everything anymore. There were small moments that should have made me pause. Times when my daughter hesitated before telling me something, but spoke freely to him. Times when decisions were already made by the time I heard about them. "She mentioned it to me," he'd say casually. "I figured it was fine." At first it felt like relief, someone else carrying the load, someone else stepping in. Then gradually it began to feel like erosion. I remember one evening years ago, standing in the hallway outside my daughter's room. She was laughing, really laughing on the phone. When she saw me, she lowered her voice, turned away. It was nothing. Teenagers do that. Still, something in my chest tightened. Later that night, I asked him if she'd seemed off lately. He shrugged. "She talks to me," he said. "She's fine." The way he said it, gentle, confident, made me feel foolish for asking, so I stopped asking as much. Life moved on. My daughter grew. My stepdaughter grew too. They became more independent, more private. We told them, together, that if they were ever in trouble, they could call. Anytime. No judgment. I agreed with that rule wholeheartedly. I believed in safety over punishment. What I didn't realize then was that I assumed safety included transparency. He didn't. There were other times looking back when silence settled in places it shouldn't have. A school email addressed to him that I saw days later. A conversation he'd had with my daughter about her future plans that I heard about secondhand. Each time, I felt a flicker of discomfort, then smoothed it over. I told myself I was being sensitive, that blended families are complicated, that trust means letting go. Still, the red notebook found its way back into my life, tucked into a drawer this time. Not for money anymore, but for reminders. Questions I meant to ask. Things I didn't want to forget. It felt silly, secretive even, but it grounded me. On the night he picked my daughter up from that party, I was asleep. I remember waking briefly to the sound of the garage door, the distant thump of footsteps. I turned over, assumed it was him getting home late. I didn't get up. I didn't check. In the morning, my daughter was quiet but present. She ate breakfast. She kissed my cheek before school. There was no smell of alcohol, no visible signs of the night before. The house looked the same. That's the thing about some truths. They don't announce themselves. They sit politely in the corner, waiting to be noticed. As I stood in the kitchen days later, stirring a pot and pretending not to shake, I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that knowing was a burden, that not knowing was peace. But peace built on exclusion is fragile. That afternoon, I pulled the red notebook from the drawer and opened it. The pages were mostly blank now. I flipped to the back and wrote a single line. What else don't I know? The pen pressed harder into the paper than I intended, leaving a faint tear in the page. And as I closed the notebook, a quiet, unsettling realization settled in me. This wasn't the first time truth had been rerouted around me. It was just the first time I'd seen the detour clearly. The shift didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, disguised as normalcy. Dinners continued. Laundry got folded. We asked each other how our days were and accepted the answers without digging. The house stayed clean. The lights stayed on. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, something had narrowed. My husband began positioning himself between me and my daughter without ever touching us. He'd answer questions I directed at her. He'd intercept conversations with a light joke, a casual redirection. "She already told me," he'd say, smiling as if that explained everything. One evening, I asked her what time she'd be home from a study session. Before she could answer, he spoke from the sink, his back to us. "Around 9, he said. "I already talked to her about it." She nodded quickly, eyes dropping to the floor. I caught it. That brief flash of relief on her face that she didn't have to speak. That relief hurt more than defiance would have. At the table, my fork hovered over my plate. The food had gone lukewarm. "I was asking her," I said. He turned, drying his hands slowly. "And I answered," he replied. Not sharp, not loud, just final. The silence that followed stretched too long. My daughter shifted in her chair, then stood. "I'm going to go finish my homework," she said, already backing away. Her door closed softly down the hall. Too softly, like she didn't want to be noticed leaving. I sat there, staring at the empty chair, my appetite gone. My husband resumed eating as if nothing had happened. The clink of his fork against the plate sounded louder than it should have. "You don't need to compete with me," he said casually. I looked up. "I'm not competing." "It feels like you are," he replied. "You're making this tense for her. For her. Again." I pushed my chair back and stood, my knees unsteady. "I'm her mother." He glanced up at me, eyebrows raised slightly like I'd said something outdated, and I'm trying to be a safe adult she can come to. The word safe landed like a judgment, as if I were the alternative. Later that night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. Pipes ticked. The wind brushed against the siding. In the dark, my thoughts came in short, sharp fragments. He's rewriting the rules. He's teaching her something without me. I felt a tightness in my chest that wouldn't loosen. The next morning, I found my daughter's backpack by the door, heavier than usual. A faint, sour smell lingered when I brushed past it. I paused, hand hovering, then stopped myself. I didn't open it. I told myself trust meant restraint. When I mentioned the smell at breakfast, my husband didn't look up from his coffee. "Probably someone else's stuff," he said. "Kids' bags are gross." My daughter kept her eyes on her cereal. At work, I checked my phone more than usual. No messages, no emergencies. Still, my shoulders stayed tight, as if I were bracing for something unseen. That afternoon, the school called. The woman on the line spoke gently, professionally. "We had a concern today," she said. "Your daughter seemed unwell during last period." My heart jumped. "Unwell how?" She hesitated. "Disoriented. Her teacher noticed. We just wanted to make sure you were aware." Aware. The word echoed. "I wasn't," I said. "Well," the woman replied, her tone shifting slightly. "Your husband spoke with the counselor earlier this week. He assured us everything at home is stable." I closed my eyes. "He did?" "Yes. He mentioned you were both on the same page." After I hung up, I sat staring at my desk, the edges blurring. My hands felt cold. He'd gone to the school, spoken for me, smoothed things over before I even knew there was something to address. That night, when I brought it up, he didn't deny it. "I didn't want you to panic," he said, setting his keys on the counter. "It was handled." My voice came out thin. "You went to her school without telling me." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "You've been on edge lately. I didn't think it was the right time to pile more on." I stared at him. "You decided that?" "Yes," he said. "I did." The silence after that felt like a held breath that never released. I noticed my hands trembling slightly and tucked them into my sleeves. Over the next few weeks, the pattern deepened. Information reached me late or sideways. Decisions were presented as done. If I questioned them, I was told I was overreacting, reading into things, creating problems where there were none. Once at a family gathering, my sister asked how my daughter was doing. Before I could answer, my husband laughed lightly. "She's great," he said. "Thriving, actually." I smiled because everyone was watching. Warm light filled the room, the kind that suggests comfort and belonging. I felt exposed under it, like my uncertainty was visible. Later, my sister pulled me aside. "You okay?" she whispered. I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Fine," I said. The word felt like a betrayal of myself. At home, I noticed small changes in my daughter. She started checking her phone constantly, flinching when it buzzed. She avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. Her laughter sounded forced, then disappeared altogether. One evening, I found the red notebook on my bedside table, where I hadn't left it. My husband sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through it slowly. "What's this?" he asked. My stomach dropped. "That's mine." He held it up. "You're writing things down about us?" "About me," I said, reaching for it. He closed it before I could grab it. "This kind of thing creates distance," he said. "You're cataloging instead of communicating." I felt heat rise to my face. "You went through my things." "I found it," he corrected. I was concerned. Concern. Another word that sounded like care until you looked too closely. He placed the notebook back on the table, but not gently. The corner bent slightly. I noticed it and hated myself for noticing. "I just want peace in this house," he said. I nodded, because arguing felt pointless, because I was tired, because the floor seemed to tilt if I stood too long. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the lamp casting a narrow pool of light. The rest of the room stayed in shadow. I stared at my hands, the faint lines and spots I didn't remember earning. A thought surfaced, unwanted and sharp. He's not raising his voice because he doesn't need to. The realization made my chest tighten painfully. I pressed my palm there, breathing shallowly until the feeling passed. A few days later, my daughter missed curfew. When she came in, my husband was the one waiting by the door. I watched from the hallway as he spoke to her in low tones, his posture relaxed, his face calm. She nodded, eyes downcast. I stepped forward. "Where were you?" I asked. She flinched. He turned toward me, a warning in his eyes. "We've got it handled," he said quietly. Handled. Again. My daughter slipped past us and went to her room without a word. The door closed. The click echoed. I stood there, suddenly unsure where I belonged in my own house. "You're pushing me out," I said, my voice barely steady. He didn't deny it. He simply said, "You're pushing yourself." The room felt colder then. The warmth leached out. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale. Later that night, alone in the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked older than I remembered, the lines around my mouth deeper. My hands shook as I turned off the light. In the dark, I felt a quiet collapse. Not dramatic, not loud, just the sinking awareness that whatever was happening wasn't accidental, and it wasn't temporary. And as I slid into bed, beside a man who slept peacefully, I understood with chilling clarity that the ground beneath me had already given way. I just hadn't finished falling yet. The moment didn't arrive with noise. It came on an ordinary afternoon, quiet enough that I almost missed it. I was folding laundry in the living room, stacking clean shirts with mechanical precision, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen, expecting nothing. The name that appeared made my fingers still. It was my daughter. She never called me from inside the house. I answered immediately. "Are you okay?" There was a pause. Not silence. Breathing. Controlled. Careful. "Can you come get me?" she asked. "I'm home," I said. "Where are you?" "At the park by the school," she replied. "Please." The word please landed differently than panic would have. It was measured, chosen. My heart thudded once, hard, then steadied. "I'm coming," I said, already reaching for my keys. I didn't tell my husband where I was going. I didn't feel the need to explain. That alone told me something had shifted. The drive was short. I kept my eyes on the road, my grip firm on the steering wheel. My thoughts tried to scatter, and I forced them into a single line. Get there. She sat on the edge of the bench under the trees, shoulders hunched, backpack at her feet. When she saw the car, she didn't wave. She just stood, slow and tentative, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to move. I pulled up and got out. The air was cool, the light flat and colorless. I didn't comment on anything. I just opened my arms. She stepped into them and held on longer than usual. Her body felt rigid at first, then softened, like she'd been bracing for impact that never came. "I didn't know who else to call," she said into my shoulder. I closed my eyes briefly. "You can always call me." She nodded but didn't pull away. We sat in the car for a moment before driving. She stared out the window, fingers twisting together in her lap. I waited. I didn't rush her. I didn't fill the space. "He told me not to bother you," she said suddenly. I kept my eyes on the road. "Who did?" She swallowed. "Him." The word carried weight without needing a name. "What did he say?" I asked. "That you've been stressed," she replied. "That it would make things worse if I upset you." My jaw tightened, then released. I focused on breathing evenly. Did he say that to protect me? I asked. Or to protect himself? She was quiet for a few seconds, then softly, I don't know anymore. The honesty in that answer cut deeper than accusation would have. I nodded once. He talks to people for me, she continued, voice barely above a whisper. The school, my friend's mom, sometimes even my counselor. He says it's easier if one person handles it. My hands tightened on the wheel. Did you ask him to? She shook her head. Not really. I felt something settle in me then. Not anger, not fear, recognition. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always had. Neat, quiet, innocent. Inside, my husband was in the kitchen, phone in hand, smiling faintly at the screen. He looked up when we entered. There you are, he said easily. I was wondering where you'd gone. My daughter stopped behind me. I felt her hesitation like a physical pressure. I picked her up, I said. His smile faltered just slightly. I could have. I know, I interrupted. My voice was calm, steady. She called me. Yeah, he looked at her, then back at me. You didn't need to rush out like that, he said. We've talked about this. I set my keys on the counter with deliberate care. We have, I agreed. He crossed his arms. You're undermining the structure we agreed on. That word, structure, made something inside me click into place. I turned to my daughter. Go to your room, I said gently. I'll come check on you in a bit. She hesitated, eyes flicking between us. Then she nodded and walked down the hall, her steps quick and light, like she was escaping a storm. When her door closed, the house felt suddenly larger, emptier. My husband exhaled. You didn't have to do that in front of her. I did, I said. He studied my face, searching for cracks. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I met his gaze. You told my child not to come to me. I told her not to stress you out. You told her I wasn't safe, I replied. His mouth opened, then closed. That's not what I meant. But that's what you did. The silence stretched. He shifted his weight, impatience seeping through his calm. I've been holding this family together, he said. Someone has to be rational. The word rational sounded rehearsed. I nodded slowly. And you decided that someone wasn't me. He frowned. You're twisting this. No, I said. I'm seeing it. Something in my tone must have changed because he straightened. Seeing what? I took a breath. That you don't just keep things from me. You replace me. His eyes narrowed. That's dramatic. It's accurate. He scoffed quietly. You're reacting emotionally. I let the insult pass through me without sticking. I'm reacting clearly. For the first time, he looked unsettled. I need you to stop speaking for my daughter, I said. To the school, to anyone. If something involves her, I'm included. No exceptions. He laughed once, sharp. You can't just rewrite everything. I'm not rewriting, I said. I'm reclaiming. The word hung between us. You don't trust me, he said. I thought about it truly. I don't trust secrecy dressed up as care, I replied. His jaw tightened. You're making this adversarial. No, I said. I'm drawing a line. The kitchen felt smaller then, the light harsher. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed again. If you push this, he said quietly, you're going to create problems you can't fix. I looked at him and realized with startling calm that I wasn't afraid of that anymore. Then they were already there, I said. I turned and walked down the hall to my daughter's room, my steps steady, my hands no longer shaking. Behind me, he didn't follow. And in that absence, I understood that the moment I chose to stand fully in my place, something irreversible had begun. I didn't announce what I was doing. I just started paying attention again. Not the anxious, second-guessing kind of attention I'd been trapped in for months, but the old kind, the one that had kept a roof over my child's head when I was young and alone, the kind that notices patterns, timing, gaps. The red notebook came back out of the drawer. I didn't leave it on the nightstand anymore. I kept it in my bag, tucked behind receipts and old appointment cards. The cover was bent from before, the corner still creased where he'd set it down too hard. That crease mattered. It reminded me why I was writing. I didn't write feelings. I wrote facts, dates, who spoke to whom, what I was told and when, what I found out later. It surprised me how quickly the pages filled. At school pickup, I stopped pretending everything was fine. I stood closer. I listened harder. When the counselor greeted me with polite familiarity, I smiled back and asked, lightly, "Can you loop me in on anything ongoing? I like to stay informed." She hesitated, just a fraction. "Of course," she said. "We usually coordinate with your husband." Usually. The word slid into place. At home, I changed nothing outwardly. I still cooked dinner, still asked how everyone's day was, still folded laundry and wiped counters. I let him believe the tension had passed, that the line I'd drawn was temporary emotion. That was important. I watched how he relaxed when he thought he'd won back control, the way his shoulders loosened, the way his tone softened, patronizing again. He started volunteering information selectively like offerings. "I talked to the school today," he'd say casually. "Nothing major." I wrote it down. My daughter noticed the shift before he did. One night, as I tucked her in, she watched me quietly, her eyes following my hands as I smoothed the blanket. "You're different," she said. I paused. "How so?" "You're not asking me a million questions," she replied, "but you're here." I sat on the edge of her bed. The room was dim, lit only by the lamp on her desk. Warm light, temporary safety. "You don't have to choose between us," I said carefully. Her fingers twisted into the fabric of the sheet. "I know." But her voice didn't sound convinced. Over the next week, small things surfaced. A forwarded email she'd been copied on but never shown me. A voicemail from a parent she didn't recognize thanking my husband for handling the situation. A missed appointment she'd assumed I knew about. Each time I resisted the urge to confront, I logged it, quietly. I reached out to my sister again, this time without minimizing. We met for coffee on a weekday afternoon, the cafe half empty. The light there was cool and flat, bouncing off metal tables. "He's cutting you out," she said after I told her everything, no softening this time. "I know," I replied. "Why?" she asked. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream dissolve. "Control," I said finally, but disguised as competence. She nodded. "What are you going to do?" I closed my notebook. "Make it visible." That became my focus. Not revenge, not explosion, exposure. I started requesting written summaries from the school, from the counselor, just so we're all aligned, I'd say. Polite, reasonable, unthreatening. Some replies came slowly, some came quickly, with an apologetic tone I recognized. A few contained phrases that made my stomach tighten. "As discussed with your husband, per your husband's guidance, since your husband indicated guidance." At home, my husband began noticing the emails, the phone calls, the subtle shift in how people addressed me. "You're micromanaging," he said one evening, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "I'm parenting," I replied, not looking up from my notebook. He watched me for a long moment. "You don't trust me." I turned a page. "Trust doesn't require secrecy." His lips pressed into a thin line. Silence stretched. I could feel his irritation building, contained, but sharp. I started talking directly to my daughter's counselor myself, scheduling meetings during hours I knew he was working. I didn't hide it, but I didn't announce it either. The counselor was careful at first, neutral, but during our third conversation, she paused mid-sentence. "I wasn't aware you hadn't been informed about that," she said. "About what?" I asked. She hesitated, then corrected herself. "Never mind, I'll send you the full file." The word file echoed. When the email arrived later that day, I sat at the dining table and read slowly. Notes, dates, decisions made, plans discussed, many of them without my presence. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I began gathering copies, saving emails, printing summaries, sliding them into a thin folder I kept at the bottom of my bag. It felt heavier each day, though the pages themselves were light. My husband noticed the bag. "You carrying bricks in there?" he joked one night, reaching for it. I moved it out of his reach without thinking. The gesture was small, instinctive. He raised an eyebrow. "What's in there?" "Mine," I said. He laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're getting paranoid." I met his eyes. "I'm getting prepared." Something flickered across his face then. Uncertainty. Not fear yet, but awareness. The house grew quieter after that. Not peaceful. Tense. Like a held breath. Conversations became shorter. His charm sharpened, then dulled. He began correcting himself mid-sentence, glancing at me more often, gauging. I kept my tone even, my movements unhurried. I didn't argue unless necessary. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain myself. I also started documenting my daughter's voice, not recordings, just moments, things she said when she thought no one was shaping her answers. "He tells me you worry too much," she admitted one night, staring at the wall. "What do you think?" I asked. She shrugged. "I think you notice things." I wrote that down too. The final piece came unexpectedly. One afternoon, I checked the mail and found an envelope addressed to my husband, marked urgent. It was from the school district. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. That night, he mentioned casually that there might be a review meeting coming up. "Nothing serious," he said, "just protocol." I smiled and nodded. "When is it?" "Next week," he replied. "I'll handle it." I felt my pulse quicken, just slightly. "We'll attend," I said. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "We?" "Yes," I said calmly. "We." He studied me. The room quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. "It might be better if I wasn't there," I finished. He exhaled slowly. "It's complicated." I leaned back in my chair. "Then it requires both parents." He didn't answer. He just ate the rest of his dinner in silence, his jaw tight. That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing, steady, untroubled. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting as a car passed outside. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what was coming, because whatever happened next wouldn't be whispered around me. It would happen in the open, with everyone watching. The conference room was colder than it needed to be. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed steadily above us, but emotionally. Cold in the way spaces feel when truth has been delayed too long. A long rectangular table sat in the center, its surface too polished, reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Every fingerprint showed, every smudge looked like evidence. We arrived separately. That wasn't planned, but it mattered. My husband was already there when I walked in, seated closer to the head of the table, jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair. He looked up when he saw me, surprise flickering across his face before he smoothed it into a polite smile. "You came early," he said. "So did you," I replied, taking a seat directly across from him. The symmetry felt intentional, even if it wasn't. The school counselor entered next, followed by an assistant principal I recognized only vaguely. They greeted us with professional warmth that didn't quite reach their eyes. Folders were placed on the table, pens aligned, chairs adjusted, routine. My daughter wasn't there. That had been made clear ahead of time. This meeting was administrative, about process, about communication, about concerns. I folded my hands in front of me and waited. The assistant principal began. "Thank you both for coming. We wanted to review some ongoing coordination regarding your daughter and ensure everyone is aligned." Aligned? Another word that sounded harmless until you examined it. My husband nodded easily. "Of course. I've been in touch with the counselor regularly." "I know," I said. He glanced at me, irritation flashing quickly before disappearing. The counselor cleared her throat. "There have been several instances over the past months where decisions were made based on information provided by one parent." She hesitated, then continued. Specifically, guidance was given indicating that the mother preferred limited involvement due to stress. The room went very still. I felt my pulse in my ears, steady but strong. I never said that. The counselor looked between us. We were told. You were told, I repeated gently, by him. My husband shifted in his chair. That's not fair. I was trying to protect her. The assistant principal raised a hand slightly. Let's keep this constructive. I nodded. I agree. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thin folder. The sound of paper against paper felt loud in the quiet room. I placed it on the table, sliding it forward just enough to be noticed. These are copies of emails, summaries, and notes from the last 6 months, I said, many of which I was not included on. My husband's eyes dropped to the folder. His jaw tightened. I'd like to clarify something, I continued. At no point did I request reduced involvement. At no point did I consent to being excluded. And at no point was I informed that representations were being made on my behalf. The counselor leaned forward, scanning the top page as I slid it toward her. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. This email, she said slowly, states that the mother requested not to be contacted directly. I did not, I said. My husband opened his mouth. You were overwhelmed. I was not consulted, I said, cutting in, my voice even. Those are not the same thing. The assistant principal looked at him now. Did you indicate that your wife preferred limited communication? He hesitated, just long enough. I thought it was implied, he said finally, given how tense things have been. I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was the silence I'd been preparing for, the kind that exposes. I have a question, I said, turning to the assistant principal. In your experience, when one parent speaks for another without consent, how is that usually handled? She paused. We typically require written confirmation. I see, I said. And when was that confirmation provided? The assistant principal looked at the counselor. The counselor looked back at the documents. It wasn't, she said quietly. My husband shifted again, his chair legs scraping slightly against the floor. The sound grated. This is being blown out of proportion, he said. I was acting in good faith. Good faith doesn't erase impact, I replied. The room felt smaller now, the overhead lights harsher. I noticed my hands were steady as I opened the folder again. There's more, I said. Several conversations were had with third parties, parents, staff, where decisions were framed as mutual when they were not. I slid another page forward. A printed email, names highlighted. The counselor's brow furrowed. This references a meeting we believed both parents attended. I was at work, I said. I wasn't informed. My husband's composure cracked then. I was trying to keep things simple, he snapped. She complicates things. The words hung in the air. I didn't react right away. I let them sit. The assistant principal straightened. That's not an appropriate characterization. I turned to my husband. You told my child not to come to me. You told professionals I was unavailable. You told others you spoke for me. He scoffed. You're twisting everything. No, I said softly. I'm untying it. The counselor closed the folder. We need to pause, she said. This raises concerns about consent and communication. My husband's face flushed. This is ridiculous. I leaned back slightly, meeting his eyes. What's ridiculous is thinking I wouldn't notice. For the first time, he looked rattled. The assistant principal took a breath. Going forward, we will require direct communication with both parents. No exceptions. Thank you, I said. My husband leaned forward. This is unnecessary. It's standard, she replied, and overdue. The word landed like a gavel. There was a knock at the door. Another staff member poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, she said, eyes flicking between us, but there's a question about parental authorization for the upcoming review. My husband straightened. I've already handled that. She hesitated. We actually need signatures from both parents. I felt something settle into place. I'm here, I said. She nodded, relief visible. Perfect. We'll bring the forms. When the door closed again, my husband stared at the table. You didn't have to do this like this, he muttered. I watched him carefully. How should I have done it? He didn't answer. The forms arrived. Papers were spread, pens offered. As I signed my name, I noticed his hand tremble slightly when he picked up the pen. Just once. Then he steadied it. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. Apologies were offered, not to him, but to me. Assurances made, processes revised. When we stood to leave, the counselor touched my arm lightly. I'm sorry, she said. We should have checked. I nodded. Thank you for listening now. In the hallway, my husband walked a step ahead of me. His shoulders were rigid, his usual ease gone. Outside, the sunlight was too bright. It reflected off the building's glass, forcing us both to squint. You humiliated me, he said, turning sharply. I met his gaze. You humiliated me first. That was different. Yes, I said. It was private. His mouth tightened. You've made me look controlling. I considered that. I didn't make you look like anything, I said. I stopped covering. He laughed bitterly. You think this is over? I looked at him. Really looked. The man who had spoken over me for me instead of with me. No, I said. I think it's visible. He stared at me, searching for the woman who used to back down. She wasn't there. Inside the building, behind us, conversations resumed, papers shuffled, systems corrected. And as we walked to our separate cars, I knew something fundamental had shifted. Not because I'd won, but because the truth had finally stood in the light, and it hadn't needed my permission to do damage. The house didn't change overnight. It didn't need to. What changed was the way I moved through it. In the weeks after the meeting, my husband spoke less. When he did, his words were careful, measured in a way that no longer felt confident. It felt monitored. The ease he once carried had thinned, like fabric worn too many times. The school emails came to both of us now, always both. The counselor addressed me by name, directly. Meetings were scheduled with my availability in mind, not worked around it. Nothing dramatic, just correct. My daughter noticed first. She stopped hovering at doorways. She answered questions without looking over her shoulder. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table while I cooked and told me about a bad grade without preamble or apology. I listened. I didn't fix it for her. I didn't redirect it. I stayed present. That was enough. My husband tried, at first, to reclaim the old rhythm. Small gestures, casual jokes, an arm around my waist in front of others like proof. I didn't pull away. I also didn't lean in. One night, he said quietly, you didn't have to make me the villain. I rinsed a plate and set it in the rack, letting the water run a moment longer than necessary. I didn't, I replied. I made myself visible. He didn't argue after that. The tension settled into something dull and honest. We began having conversations with witnesses, emails, schedules, shared calendars. Not because we didn't trust each other, but because trust doesn't survive in the dark. Eventually, he asked if we were okay. I thought about it carefully before answering. We're different, I said, and different isn't a threat. He nodded, slow. I could see him adjusting to a reality where control wasn't mistaken for care. Whether that adjustment would last wasn't something I needed to decide right away. What mattered was that I no longer felt erased. The red notebook moved from my bag back to the drawer, but I didn't hide it. I didn't need to. Its pages were filled now, not with fear, but with clarity. Dates that told a story. Facts that held their shape even when emotions shifted. One afternoon, my daughter asked if she could see it. I hesitated, then handed it to her. She flipped through a few pages, then closed it gently. You kept track, she said. I did, I replied. She nodded, like that explained something she'd been trying to understand for a long time. "I like that you notice things," she said. I smiled, small and real. The house felt warmer after that. Not safer in a naive way, but grounded, honest. The light in the mornings softened again, no longer harsh. Evenings settled without the tightness that used to creep into my chest. I didn't win anything. I didn't expose secrets for applause. I simply stood where I belonged and refused to move when someone tried to step in front of me. That was enough to change everything. Now, when I open the red notebook, I don't see a record of what I lost. I see proof of what I reclaimed, the quiet strength of paying attention, the courage of insisting on truth, the steady work of showing up even when it's uncomfortable. If my story touched you, let me know. Sometimes sharing what we notice, especially the small, easily dismissed things, reminds us that clarity can be an act of love, and that being seen starts with refusing to disappear.